Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Barker. I'm a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We take one screenplay, we deconstruct it, we find out what we love about it, what's unique about it, and most importantly, what we can learn from it. And this week, our screenplay is Babygirl by Halina Reijn. It's a 2024 psychological drama / exotic thriller, and it's getting a lot of buzz.
I have these fantasies.
What do you mean? It's about giving and taking power.
What did you do? Go to a library, look that up?
This is what I'm talking
No,
about.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No.
Say it again.
I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
Good girl.
It has been nominated for a lot of awards, including Best Actress at the Golden Globes, and it actually won Best Actress for Nicole Kidman at the Venice Film Festival. But we're talking about the screenplay, and the screenplay explores complex relationship dynamics, inappropriate relationships, power dynamics, and self-discovery. And let's talk about the writer, Halina Reijn. In this case, she's also the director of this film, 49 years old, from Amsterdam. She started her career as an actress, first on the stage, then in many films. She comes from a very artistic family. Her father has a career in theater. She had a distinguished career at the Amsterdam Theater, which is sort of like Broadway over there. Was featured in many theatrical productions, won many awards. She was also in Valkyrie with Tom Cruise in 2008. And she started a very successful writing career in the late 2010s. She co-wrote Instinct in 2019, also directed that film and was nominated for an Oscar for Best International Film. She also directed the 2022 horror slasher Bodies, 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 which has some success. She didn't write that one. And she co-created the television series Red Light. She's currently in development with A24 for her next project, and it's also about female perspective in an environment and situation that you might not expect. And that is what we're dealing with today with Babygirl. So how was it developed? It was inspired by her fascination with erotic thrillers from the 80s and the 90s. In particular, she was interested in exploring sexual issues inside otherwise successful marriages. And she played with this idea over several years, on and off with this screenplay, until she finalized a copy in 2023. And then casting was announced November of 2023, including big names. Nicole Kidman was attached, Antonio Banderas, Sophie Wilde, who's a huge up-and-coming star, Harris Dickinson, who's had a lot of success on screen recently, including Triangle of Sadness. That's a good movie. It was shot over 9 weeks, December 23 through February of 2024, and a very quick post because it hit the theaters Christmas Day 2024. It was shot with a budget of $20 million, so a pretty sizable production. And that's because A24 was not only the distributor, but also part of the production, the financing. They handled most of the post-production. 2AM, which is a relatively new production company, they're a strategic partner with A24. They did Bodies, 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 Past Lives. They were highly involved. And the film was a huge success at the box office, bringing in $63 million at the theater. And just getting started with streaming and other distributions. It is among A24's highest grossing films yet. All right, let's get started with the screenplay, and we always start with the logline. Here is the official logline of Babygirl. A high-powered CEO puts her career and family on the line when she begins a torrid affair with a much younger intern. And here's my go at it. A formidable CEO begins a dangerous affair with her magnetic young intern, igniting a spiral of obsession, betrayal, and power that threatens to consume her career, her family, and herself. Mine has a little more meat on the bones, but doesn't mean it's better. Sometimes you want a streamlined log line. Sometimes you want it to be a little more detailed. Now I want to see your log lines. Let's go to the comments, drop them in there, and let's see what you guys come up with. And here are the statistics of the screenplay. It's 90 pages, 122 scenes. The runtime of the film was 1 hour and 54 minutes, so that means it's an hour, scratch that, a minute and 15 seconds per page, 1.3 scenes per page. Now we go to formatting, mechanics, and style. This is where the screenwriter gives us the instructions of how to read their individual screenplay. And not only that, this is where we get to see the unique elements of everyone's different screenplays. And there are some unique elements in this one. We'll start with these gigantic blocks of text. And we've been saying that a lot lately with all the screenplays we've been breaking down, but this one takes the cake. Look at page 70 here. And wow, that's really, it's two gigantic paragraphs, but there's nothing to break up those paragraphs. So really it's one gigantic block of text, 40 lines long, by far the longest we've seen in all of the screenplays we've broken down here on the Screenplay Lab. I think we're up to 11 or 12 screenplays at this point. And this is the winner, largest block of text ever. This is describing when Rami shows up at the warehouse dance club. And it describes everything that happens beat by beat. Previously, she was breaking these up into beats, more precise action lines. But here she just lets it go. She just puts it all out there and you have to read it. But there's some interesting stuff in here. Most of it does end up in the film. There are 7 blocks of text or paragraphs that have 12 or 13 lines or more. Page 41 has 2 of them on display. So this is what really jumps out at you when you open up the screenplay. At the same time, she actually has a lot of white space, believe it or not. Though that might just be recency bias because the last screenplay we broke down was Waves. And boy, that thing had a lot of words. In fact, to compare the two, this one's 90 pages and it's 18,000 words. Waves was 101 pages, so about the same, a little bit bigger, 29,000 words. You can see what I'm talking about, like here on page 77. Reads vertically, a lot of space, flows very quickly. But what makes most of the pages seem white, even when they have those gigantic blocks of text, is that she has some wide margins. She opts for an 1.5 inch margin on the far side of the page, which standard is usually an inch, so that compresses things a little bit, but at the same time gives you a little more visual white on the page. That's probably why she did that. She does the double line space before each scene heading, which gives you a little more white on the page. But I think we get extra white on the page because of this. She often has pretty thick chunks of dialogue, and rather than stopping it at the end of the page, putting a continues, and then, breaking that up, she just takes it to the next page. So you have pages with a lot of white space where that dialogue box or dialogue chunk just gets moved down to the next page. You can see an example of that here, 5-6. Another element we see from Halina Reijn is prelap. She uses prelap 5 times in the screenplay. That's where the character's dialogue starts before the actual scene starts. Example of that here on page 5, where Rami is talking and she's giving a speech about robots and how her company works and inspirational stuff. And then it says there by her name, prelap, and you can see the next scene starts down below the dialogue. At some point in the dialogue, they kick in and we start to see the character, but you hear the character before you see the character. She also likes parenthetical a lot, and she uses it for all the ways you would use a parenthetical, for action lines to compress them into the dialogue, for reaction, for line delivery, for clarification. There are well over 100 parentheticals in the screenplay. We can look at page 10 just to get a flavor of it. There are several on here. There's Samuel, he's talking, and it says in parenthetical quotes, without blinking. So that's instructions to the actor of how to act while they're giving this line. Another one for Samuel there, it says he looks at her with a twinkle in his eye. Cheeky, serious, fatherly, a pause, another way to say a beat. So she likes to use those, and it's a quick way to get down the page instead of adding a whole other action line. She also has 4 variations of the slug line. I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but the dash toward the end of the slug line that indicates day, night, some sort of time. She does it 4 different ways. Sometimes we see it with no dash at all. That happens several times in the screenplay. Sometimes the dash is connected to one of the words. Sometimes it's squeezed in there, connected to both words. Sometimes it's pulled apart and in the middle, like you would more traditionally see. So 4 different ways in the screenplay that she did the slug lines. One interesting thing that she did in the screenplay is in the final block of the screenplay, I'd say final scene, but it's really 2 scenes. She takes those 2 scenes and she interweaves them back and forth. But the way she depicts that on the page is she does one scene in regular font and she does the other scene by underlining it with one scene heading. So you can see there it says interior Rami and Jacob's apartment bedroom / cheap hotel room day. So you have Rami and Jacob in one location and you have Samuel in a different location, and she's going to intercut between these two scenes. And again, all of Samuel's action lines are underlined. And this is the only time this happens in the screenplay, but it is the final scene, and sometimes we see extra stuff at the very end of a screenplay. So it makes sense, it works, and there's no confusion about what's going on the page, and that's the most important thing. And we're getting quite the education about montages in the last several weeks, breaking down these screenplays. In fact, I've been keeping count, including these 2 new ways to do it. We've come up with 15 different ways that you could do a montage. If you're interested in seeing some of those other ones, you can pull up my other videos or audio podcasts and check them out. So let's look at the 2 ways that she does it. On page 42, she starts off by saying interior, exterior, montage, various. So that's a common way to do it. But what's interesting about this is that she continues to put slug headings all the way down the page with a dash, so that's easy for us to visually see, okay, this is part of a montage in case we forgot. And she takes the action lines and she butts them up directly to the slug line. So there's no space there. Well, except for one. There's that one where Samuel enters the room. She did that one a little differently. But for the rest of them, it's squeezed in there so it looks more like little paragraphs and it's easier for the eye to pick up. Then on page 60, she gives us a montage that goes over 5 pages. But it's really, I don't even know if you would call it a montage, because once she gets into these, they're almost, well, they're not beats and they're not setups. They're more like vignettes where things are happening, dialogue's taking place, and they're numbered, which is interesting. So on the first page, page 60, we get number 1. You know, you have an action line, and then you see Samuel talking there, dialogue. Then we get a number 2, and then number 2 stretches all the way down over almost 3 pages. Because then on page 63, we get number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. And then on the next page, 64, we get 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So it's a very long action sequence, numbered. For whatever reason, she decided to do that here. And it's another way that you could look at formatting your montages if you wanted to. And we like to check in and see how the screenwriters use bold and italics in their screenplay and underlining. Here, the thing that stood out the most is the italics. She uses it a couple different ways, but the most interesting way is for dialogue on the stage. So remember, if you've seen the film or if you read the screenplay, there's some acting on the stage because her husband is a theater director. And this, of course, comes from her background in theater, and her father was a theater director. And whenever the actors are acting on stage, their dialogue, because they're actually delivering that dialogue in the film, is italicized. So that keeps it distinguished from the other characters' dialogue. It's sort of what we've seen in these other screenplays when it's a different language. I'm going to take a minute here to just pause and say thank you for watching this podcast and listening to this podcast. It means a lot to me. If you would, please like, subscribe, share me with your filmmaking friends, your screenwriting friends. If you want to keep up with what's going on with me, the best way to do that is at my website, jeff-barker.com. And also, I update on all the socials as much as I can, so let's be friends.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
Now for our popular segment, Direction on the Page, because we're trying to determine how the true professional screenwriters are using direction on the page, if they are or if they're not. And then you guys can debate about it all you want. But, you know, you could take away from it and see, do I want to include direction on my pages? So here, she does use it quite a bit. The we see, we follow, we are, we cut to, we hear, we read. 31 times in the screenplay, she goes there so that we're the camera visualizing. It creates visual stimulation as the reader goes through the screenplay. And she's not afraid to describe framing in the screenplay. In fact, the first 2 words of the screenplay are close on. And as many screenplays as I've read, I've never seen that. I'm pretty sure that's the first time I've seen that. She mentions that intimate shot of being close, being tight, 16 times in the screenplay. On page 19, you can see here 3 times she mentioned close on, being close to the character. And in a story like this, it's important because we need to see every little eye twitch, every little muscle in the face move. That's what's really telling us the story in this character-driven psychological story. She also mentions overhead shot several times in the screenplay, 4 times actually. And then the camera itself is mentioned twice. You can see here on page 1 where she mentions the camera right up front, what she expects from it. And as I've said before, you might be thinking, well, she's the director, so of course she put this stuff in here. And this is the shooting script. Well, that's all true, but that doesn't indicate whether someone's going to put direction on the page, because some directors don't want that on there at all because they want to go about that in a separate way with their DP in a different document, shot sheet. And some want to make sure it's all on there so that there's no question about how they're going to be setting things up. Of course, it doesn't always go as planned. Sometimes that adds more confusion. But from an artistic standpoint of creating a literary document, the conclusion we should be drawing here is that it does exist. And people who are telling you don't put direction on the page, I don't know what they're reading because their direction is on the page. Now, how detailed do you want to be about it? That's up to you. And that's where your voice as a writer comes in. Because to indicate that you want the camera tight on someone's face, you don't have to necessarily say, zoom in, be tight, close on, camera. You can actually describe it in a way that in the mind makes sense. Oh, this must be a tight shot. You're talking about the eyelash. You're talking about a twitch of the muscle of the face. We'll move on now to the writing, the actual writing here in the screenplay. And one of the interesting things to point out, one of her thumbprints that makes her unique, as all screenwriters are unique, and they do leave their thumbprints all over the page, is the use of simile. Now, remember, a metaphor is when we describe something in a way that it embodies that characteristic. Simile is using like or as, and she does it quite a bit here. Here's an example on 39 where she's saying that he's studying her like a biologist. So this is part of her voice as a writer. But we have lots of likes. There's a snake, a dollhouse, a ghost, a kitten, children, a prince, a baby, a junkie, a swimmer, animals, creatures, a lot of animals. We'll talk about that. She also likes to use adverbs like slowly, lovingly, caringly, gently. 11 adverbs alone here on page 90, you can see. So not as many though. Some of the recent screenplays that we've broken down, The Brutalists, I remember, they used a ton of adverbs in there. She definitely wants to make sure that you know the speed and the approach of the characters. Speaking of metaphor, she definitely ties this story to the metaphor of an animal and this animalistic behavior and this animalistic drive. We see it throughout the screenplay. Obviously, it starts on page 5 when the aggressive dog on the street comes up to her. And of course, in the screenplay, he knocks her down and hovers over her. In the film, it doesn't get that far. But it continues. Their dancing is described as animalistic. On page 78, Rami says an animal awoke up inside her body when I believe she's talking to the therapist. On page 83, after they've had an episode, it says that they are exhausted and panting like animals. And then, of course, the scene that we just previously read, the last scene of the screenplay, the intercut scenes on page 90, is tied to Samuel in the hotel room with his dog. This is when we find out that the dog on the street at the beginning of the screenplay is actually his dog, or maybe he owns the dog now. It's not really explained. It doesn't have to be. But that was an interesting add to the story. One of the things I do admire about her writing is how she often gets into dialogue. We saw this on Us with Jordan Peele. He's also an expert at this. Let's look on page 15 to understand this a little further. This is outside the office building on the terrace. And Rami is out there in her coat and she's smoking. And then Samuel comes up and he asks for a light, which is a pretty bold move for an intern. And she gives him a light. He lights a cigarette, hands it back. And then they're sort of like smoking in silence. And then he finally says, in a kind way, we see that parenthetical, "I don't like Christmas, do you?" So instead of jumping into what he really wants to say and what we, progress the story, now we have a way to help us understand the characters a little more, humanize the characters. She thinks about the question after a beat. They start talking at the same time. They talk over each other. So you have the dual dialogue columns here. I have no issue with it. She says, "I know what I read," he says. And then oh, sorry, you go, that sort of thing. But what's interesting here is he's about to tell her something that he read. And she's about to go on about Christmas and why she doesn't have an issue with it. And she's probably going to say she has kids and she likes it. But then it gets to the meat of the conversation. The true dialogue is when he says, oh, by the way, you're my mentor. I think a lot of writers would have skipped over that, had him come out, ask for the light, then they're sitting there in silence, and then, hey, did you know you're my mentor? All right. That works. It moves the scene forward. But what we have here is a lot more interesting. Now we know a little bit more about the characters. We understand the tension between them, a lot of the nonverbal things that are going on. So bravo there. I really enjoy that. And one of the things that Reijn does very, very well is the raw emotion that is inside the dialogue. She doesn't over-explain things with her characters. She allows us to think for ourselves with the dialogue. Now, with the action lines, she tells us what they're feeling and thinking often. But with the dialogue, it's a lot of, it's not over mysterious, but it's also not giving everything away. We see a good example of that in the kitchen here when Samuel shows up at the house with his girlfriend and Rami doesn't like it. Rami says, why are you here with her? So there's a pause there. And he says, we see each other. Now, he's always challenging her. She says, what does that mean? And you can see on the page, it's a really simple line. But of course, Nicole Kidman nails it. It's delivered beautifully. And he says, what did you want me to say to her? No, I can't come with you because, and she interrupts him, says, are you dating her? She can't help herself anymore. And then his response, which again is pro-level response in screenwriting, rather than saying, getting into some sort of argument about the date and all that, he flips it on her and he says, isn't that man in the living room your husband? And then she loses it. She goes forehead to forehead with him, which happens a lot in the screenplay. I think 3 times people are pushing foreheads like offensive, defensive linemen. But that's a way to be physically aggressive without being assaulting someone. I guess it could be an assault depending on how it's done. But here she's pressing her forehead to his forehead, and she has just had enough. And this goes on and on until the girlfriend walks in. It's a great scene. Here's what it looks like on the film.
What are you doing here?
What do you mean?
Why are you here? You with her?
We see each other.
What does that mean? What?
Well, what did you want me to say? No, I can't come.
Are you dating her?
Isn't that man in there your husband?
I don't want you seeing other women. I don't want you. Why? Why? Hey!
Everything okay?
Another example of powerful, raw dialogue that is authentic is also here between Rami and Samuel on page 39, where she, once again, is giving away her power. But at the same time, she has this deep drive to be motherly, to take care of people. And she is concerned about his feelings and that she may be taking advantage of him, which she is. We could call it a mutual take advantage of relationship. If she were a man, there'd be no question that she's taking advantage of him. But that is what makes this screenplay and film so unique, is taking that and flipping it on its head and forcing us to see things through a different lens. Anyway, it's a really good scene. Here it is in the film.
You're very young. I don't want to hurt you.
Hurt me? I think I have power over you because I could make one call and you lose everything. What, does that turn you on when I say that?
She has quite a bit of interiority in this screenplay. I counted over 60 incidences of telling us what people are feeling, thinking, wanting, rather than showing us. A good example of that's on page 60, where it says straight up, she wants to get up and kiss him. So rather than having that be portrayed to us through her actions and people's responses, it just straight up tells us. And a good way to learn from that is page 52, where it's the same message, and she both shows us and tells us. So the first is the interiority, where it says here, frustration builds up inside her. So they're letting us know, she's letting us know that Rami is frustrated. But then a little bit later, we touch on the same thing by showing us, and it says she turns her back to him. tears in her eyes. So that's how she does it in her screenplay. And she calls for specific songs in the screenplay. I always appreciate it when screenwriters do that, putting their stamp on, no, this is the song I'm thinking about. This is what's going to be great. Now, it doesn't always end up in the film that way. It did this time. In fact, on 63, she calls for George Michael's father figure. And boy, was that a good call. That move alone probably made $20 million. And then on page 41, INXS's Never Tear Us Apart, right there on the screenplay. Now to the narrative elements of the screenplay, and we'll start with symbolism, and the first one we'll tackle is Babygirl. The term itself is a bit of symbolism here in the screenplay. It's a term of endearment and possession. It's cute, pillow talk, baby talk, but here it's used on a very powerful woman, so it has a whole different meaning. It speaks here to the duality of power and vulnerability. Even people who dominate boardrooms and have the lives of thousands of people in their hands, they still need personal and sexual validation. And through this derogatory and demeaning term here, it's used to control and belittle. He is an intern who has not really earned much of anything. She is a CEO, and not just a CEO, but a female CEO. So imagine what she had to go through to get to that spot. And at the same time, he's not afraid to belittle her and call her baby girl.
You're my baby girl.
And not just baby girl, but his baby girl, his possession. Corporate power structure is another bit of symbolism. It's that cold, sterile environment on the page and in the film. The robots, very clean lines, very mechanical. It reflects Rami's emotional detachment. She learns authority is fragile, especially when it interacts or intersects with sexuality. The workplace in this film reflects a place of power and service, although these roles are constantly being flipped back and forth between Rami and Samuel. Samuel himself is a bit of symbolism in this screenplay. He is a catalyst for Rami, the main character. He's there to serve her. We do learn a little bit about him, and because the acting is so good in the film, we certainly start to have understanding and feeling about this character. But on the page, he is really more of just there to serve the growth and the arc of Rami. He represents youth, which she feels she has lost. He represents risk, which she craves. And he represents repressed desire, which for her, success is being perfect. So she enjoys the ability to be able to take a vacation from herself. And then mirrors and reflections show up a lot in the screenplay, bedrooms, boardrooms, almost everywhere that they're having sex. And this represents self-confrontation, Rami being forced to see herself, even if she doesn't want to. This also reflects the duality of self, the public persona versus the private turmoil. The tone of this screenplay is an easy one. It is erotic tension. Complexities and desires of power are at play here. It is charged with sensuality, and Rami explores her suppressed fantasies because they are being awakened due to the course of actions taking place. And then there's a lot of guilt associated with what's going on, this forbidden relationship. Is it worth the risk? Actually, the point of the whole thing is the risk. Now to some of the themes. Empty perfectionism is one. Rami has shattered glass ceilings, obviously, to get where she is, singularly focused to structure her life in a way, but she's so focused on it that it goes too far and creates this facade, this image that isn't real. And this, for her, leads to profound unhappiness. You can see this through everything she's trying to do to get back some joy. The cold plunges, the light therapy, the talk therapy, the cosmetic interventions. Another theme is power and desire. Rami wants to fulfill her fantasies of being dominated and temporarily give away her power, the thing she identifies with the most. In other words, she wants to give herself away. But even in that moment, she's still concerned about others around her. She is concerned about Samuel, worried that he's young and he doesn't know what he's getting into, constantly flipping back and forth between this desire to be dominated and have no power to being motherly or parental in a lot of ways. Shame is another theme of the screenplay. She has been hammered as a child to be shameful, to feel shameful. They hint at this several times in the screenplay based on the fact that she was brought up in a cult and the flashbacks that she's having. And here in real time, she experiences the pain of jeopardizing her family and her career. But by taking on that pain, she also is gaining something. She's gaining liberation. She no longer has to pretend or deny herself. Now let's quickly look at the structure, and we're calling this a thriller, but mostly it's just because of the unease associated with it is similar to what we would see in a thriller. But at its heart, this is a character-driven psychological story. And if you look at this story as a psychological, character-driven story, understanding the structure makes a lot more sense. For example, the inciting incident in Act 1 is not actually when the dog almost attacks her or attacks her on the sidewalk. It's not even when Samuel is introduced as an intern and she recognizes him from the person on the street. For me, it's on page 22 when they're in the elevator together. There's this awkward silence. No one else is around them. They're in a contained space, nowhere to hide. And this is when we get the first glimpse that she actually likes his inappropriate and aggressive behavior. It says with a loud ding, the elevator stops. Blushing, she walks out. Tom is waiting for her in the hallway. She stares at Samuel through the elevator door. Samuel stares back as the door closes in front of him. So this is when we get the first taste that, okay, she's into him. Rising action is obviously the first intimate encounter between Samuel and Rami. This is when she's put in the corner and when she eats the candy out of his hand, and then other things happen. The midpoint emotional confrontation is Rami examining herself. She begins to doubt who she is, says that she's disappearing. She's trying to reconcile who she thought she was with who she feels she is becoming. And then on to the climax. The affair is just absolutely unsustainable. She is confronted by her assistant. She confesses to her husband. And then she is sent out to think about things and figure out who she is and what she really wants in life. And then the resolution and the question we have to ask is, did Rami actually change? Well, she certainly is more aware of who she is and what she wants and what she needs, what she desires. And she remains a person in power. Those around her continue to cater to her desires and her whims, especially her husband, who's being trained to do so. But she has been liberated through destructive behavior, although in this case, with no consequences. So it's a fairy tale. But it is a very interesting screenplay and a very fun movie. And this is what it looks like on the screen.
I genuinely believe women with power would behave differently.
Want to stop?
You seem liberated.
I've never experienced anything like this.
Good girl.
And that is Babygirl by Halina Reijn. And what makes this screenplay unique is that it subverts the traditional power dynamic by placing an older woman at the center of a psychological, complex, erotic narrative without apologizing for it, without trying to moralize it or justify it in any way. It explores desire and shame, control, rawness, vulnerability, those type of things which are rarely afforded to a woman over the age of 50. And here we focus on the screenplay, but just have to say Nicole Kidman was brave to take on this role. And not just that, she absolutely demolished it, knocked it out of the park. And it all comes back, though, to the writing. The writing that Miss Reijn put on the page here allowed Nicole Kidman to have such an outstanding performance. Please subscribe, comment, like, all that stuff. You can find me on my website, jeff-parker.com, to see what I'm up to in my life, my career. Also, I try to update on all the social media sites. You can find me there. Please share me with your screenwriting friends, with your filmmaking friends, with your friends. And I'll be back next time with another episode of the Screenplay Lab. See you then.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.